This is episode 63 with Matt Diavella.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 63 today, and I am very excited to be speaking to none other than Matt Diavella. Now, before we get to the interview, I also have an exciting announcement, and that is this show is brought to you by a sponsor, and that sponsor today is Nomad Accelerator. Now, Nomad Accelerator is a 2-week in-person bootcamp that transforms participants into successful digital nomads. The bootcamp is taught by established online entrepreneurs and digital nomads that have flown in from all across the world to teach about the skills that have helped them accelerate their nomad lifestyle. Not only will these coaches share their knowledge on stage, but they'll actually sit down with every participant to guide them one-on-one through the process of setting up and scaling their online business. You can find out more at bootcamp.nomadaccelerator.com. And if you use the coupon code QLC at checkout, you'll get a $250 discount. Now back to the show. This week I sat down with Matt Diavella. And in case you haven't heard of him, Matt is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and a commercial director whose work has been viewed by sold-out crowds around the world, from the London Palladium to the Castro Theatre in San Francisco. After graduating college in 2010 with $95,000 in student loan debt, Matt did the smartest thing you could think of at the time and bought a new car. That plummeted him to $115,000 in debt. Back then, he was living in his parents' basement while trying to make it as a filmmaker. And unhappy with where his life was going, Matt became obsessed with turning things around. He read every self-help book he could find, discovered minimalism, redefined his idea of success, grew his business, and within 5 years had paid off every single loan, even his new car. Then in 2016, Matt completed his lifelong dream of directing his first feature-length documentary called Minimalism. From there, things turned around. Matt is passionate about helping creatives get unstuck, and trying to create something from the ground up can be incredibly daunting, especially when we're doing it alone. But Matt aims to help you create the life you want, love the work you do, and make a big impact along the way. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn how Matt paid off $115,000 in debt, both physically and mentally. Is it ever a good idea to get into debt? The 4 buckets of Matt's redefined idea of success. Can you achieve major highs without experiencing lows? How to overcome self-doubt and get unstuck, and how to deal with naysayers while pursuing a different path. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/063. But for now, let's go hang out with Matt. Welcome back, everyone, and a huge welcome to today's guest. I'm excited to be speaking to Matt Diavella. Matt, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, man.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be speaking to you today. You're one of my favorite dudes online recently, and I really love the work that you've put out and what you're bringing to the world. And for people who don't know, Matt is the genius behind the minimalism film, and I'm sure we'll get into that later on. But for people listening and who haven't come across you before, why don't you tell us a bit about your quarter life story?
Yeah, so my story, I think, is pretty similar to a lot of Americans' stories these days, especially for recent graduates. So I graduated from college in 2010 with $97,000 in student loan debt. And I did the smartest thing I could think of at the time, which was to buy a brand new car. So now I had about $115,000 in debt. I'm quite literally living in my parents' basement. And I feel like a failure because up until that point, my idea of success was based around basically what society had told me and what everybody, all these influences around me had convinced me was my life's mission and goal, which was accumulate more stuff, get a bigger house, or get a house or a apartment, get a car. This was the equation to success. That way I could prove to everybody around me as well as myself that I was successful. And, being $115,000 in debt, I just felt like I was stuck. I was trapped. I was in a hole. And then I came across this thing online. I first saw it through an interview with this amazing Hollywood director, Tom Shadyac. He was telling his story about how he had gotten to a certain point in his career where he was making millions of dollars. He had a mansion, and then he moved into this 20,000 square foot mansion, whatever it was. And he realized, he's like, I don't want this. This isn't making me happy. Like, why am I doing this? So he got rid of everything, and he ended up moving into a trailer. And I was like, this to me was the most insane and radical idea, but for some reason it just clicked, and I was like, how come I've never even heard of people doing this before? It always seemed like you had to follow this certain path. So at that point, my life started to change in that I started to kind of question basic assumptions that I'd carried my entire life. And being around 21, 22 years old, my idea of success is very different from what it is right now. And it's kind of interesting to see how we, especially when we're young, we don't question. We have a limited awareness, I think, in terms of how other people around the world are living. So that to me was really a turning point. And then I started to read about all these people online who were calling themselves minimalists. Now, this guy, Tom Shadyac, I don't even know if he was really considered himself a minimalist. It was just something he was inspired to do. But then I came across these people who were living intentional lives. They were calling themselves minimalists. There was a label to it. There was a movement that was really starting. And this being around 2010, what I would come to find out later in my research is that this movement was really happening across the world, even in Japan, where minimalism and simple living has been around for generations, where it even basically started thousands of years ago. There's a new emerging new minimalism movement over there. So these people really inspired me. So I started to read all these blogs and books about the subject. I started to kind of immerse myself in really cheesy self-development, self-improvement books. My girlfriend makes fun of me all the time, but I still into it. I still think that motivation is so important and key, especially when you're struggling or you're hitting a roadblock, to be able to hear words of encouragement from somebody else that can push you forward. And in the beginning, that's what these bloggers and authors were able to do for me, in terms to show me, there's another path, there's another way that I can get through. So that was kind of the beginning of my quarter life crisis, so to speak.
Yeah, it's crazy how, like, going back to the debt, it's crazy how you were already $97,000 in debt, and then because of what society had deemed to be like, a marker of making it, or whatever you want to call it, like success, you then still went and bought a car. And plunged further into debt. It's crazy how, like, even if that wasn't you that wanted to do that, it's like, well, this is what people do. People buy cars.
And just plunge yourself further and further into debt. It seems insane now, looking back on it, especially now, because I will not put myself in a position where I'm going to be in debt to kind of so willingly just jump into it and just keep sinking further and further. And I think at the time too, it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like there was a way out. I was like, well, this is my life. I'm just going to be in debt for the rest of my life. And that's just the way it is. So why prevent myself from enjoying nice things or having a nice car? Not even thinking I could get out of it.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, like, how did you start tackling that? Like, both physically making up the debt and mentally, because it must have been quite a thing to look at your bank balance and see, like, oh man, things are not good.
Yeah, like the turning point was creating a mint.com account, which is like a financial accounting. Basically, it brings in all your bank accounts and all your assets, everything that you own, and it tells you in really simple terms what your net worth is. And it was then that I realized, I had never done the math, but I was negative $120,000. That was my net worth. I was essentially worthless. So, or worse than worthless. So
Yeah.
that to me, just seeing it, I was like, all right, shit, I need to turn things around. I need to kind of start to at least try to chip away at it. I think it was inspiring to hear about other people who had gone down the path of becoming financially free. To me, it's like at that point, even as I redefined my terms of success, I was like, well, it would be bare minimum. It would be really nice to like have an apartment, to be able to live on my own. And so I was like, all right, if I could make this amount of money, then I will feel a lot better than I do right now. But then the debt thing it was kind of a mental switch for me. So I basically, any money I made, and I was starting to run my own business at the time, which was as a freelance filmmaker, shooting weddings, bar mitzvah intro videos, those cheesy corporate commercials that you see on local TV. I actually had the experience once of while at the gym on the treadmill, looking up and seeing one of my local TV spots that I had filmed. Just
Nice.
like the most yeah.
Made it.
It was like exactly. I literally remember thinking like, oh man, this is it. I made it. Because at the time it was like a big deal, and still it's funny to think back, but it was like super cheesy. But any money I made from my business, any income that came in, I didn't see it as my money. And I think that was an important switch because I was like, this isn't my money. Like the bank owes this money. So what I would do is, and I would be pretty smart about it, or conservative, I would say, because up until that point, my finances were never conservative. So I would save up maybe $10,000. And then I would take 8,000 and then I would throw it at one specific loan. To me, that felt like a lot better than every month paying off $100 or $200. I was like, I want to actually feel like I have these big wins. So it was kind of a combination of the snowball effect, which is paying down the smallest loans, not necessarily the highest interest. I kind of did that, but I also did pay off some of the higher interest loans if they were a bit smaller. But it was I would say it was a long road, but I guess looking back on it, like I was able to pay off my debt within 4 years, about 4 years from when I graduated college. And I think like, obviously one of the main things there was that my business had done well, but also I lived at home in my parents' basement for 2 years. Like even when I could have moved out probably within a year, I just kept going. And I was like, I'm going to try to tackle as much of this debt as I could. When I moved out, I moved into a friend's apartment who gave me pretty affordable rent. I still was pretty conservative in terms of my extra spending. I think being a minimalist, it kind of comes with this par for the course. Mm-hmm. But I just kept chipping away at it, and then eventually got to the point where I was able to pay off all my debt, which was a pretty surreal experience.
It's amazing, yeah. Then you buy a new car.
Then I buy a new car.
You got to celebrate, right?
It's funny because I'm actually I have a car now. It's the same car that I bought, the 2010 Kia, and it's nothing super fancy. It's a Kia, but I'm moving to LA, so now I'm moving with my girlfriend, and we're trying to figure out. All right, well, we're gonna have to get another car. So I think I'm gonna do it a different route this time. There's like smart ways to go about it. Buying a brand new car, I don't think is always the best decision.
Do you think there's ever a time where it's where getting into debt is worth it or is a good option?
I would say it really depends on your life circumstance. I know some people, my friend Josh from The Minimalists, I think he would argue and say that it's never a good idea to get into debt, that there's no such thing as good debt. Personally, I do have a credit card. I have like a Chase Sapphire credit card, which is pretty good for travel and building up points. So, but I have that set to auto pay, and I trust myself, and I know that I will not spend more than I have in my checking account. I'm not spend more than my credit card limit. I'm not even going to come close. But as a business owner, I'm often making pretty big purchases. Like I might buy a $10,000 camera one year. Like these are like investments that continue to get bigger as you grow your business. And I'm like, well, I could do that, and then I could put it on my checking account. But if I put it on my credit card and pay it off right away, then I get these additional points, which are a nice benefit.
Yeah.
I do that because I trust myself. There are people like Dave Ramsey, he was inspiring for me early on reading his book, The Total Money Makeover. And honestly, that's a book that I read almost every year. And I continue to read finance books every year, like one a year is my goal. Because it is a mindset that you need to keep putting yourself in, and you can often drift away from your goals if you don't continue along that path. So he would say, cut up all your credit cards, don't use credit cards. And that's what I did in the beginning, which I think could be helpful. But once you achieve a certain element of financial freedom, I think you can get into debt. Like I might buy a house. I'm not opposed to that. If I was single, I probably wouldn't. It's something that my girlfriend wants down the road. And it's something that I'm not against. So that's one of those things where it's like, if you're in a relationship, you often have to make compromises. And that's one of those things that I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'd be willing to get into debt, but I would want to do it the right way. It's like, I want to put down, a huge down payment on this house. I want to maybe find a house that's much more affordable, that we're not going to be stuck in debt for 30 years. I would want to, plan it out a little more intelligently than I would have when I was 18 years old.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, but I really enjoyed that book, and I went through it. It's designed to go through over 6 weeks and kind of get you set up in your personal finances, and I really enjoyed it. It's pretty practical. And he said in there as well, like, if you're disciplined and you're not going to go crazy, then a credit card is actually a really good idea, because it's kind of like a free short-term loan, as long as you kind of pay it off every month and in full, and you can control your spending.
Yeah, I love Ramit. He's really good. He's definitely one of those books. It's funny because when you read these personal finance books early on, when you're in debt, you can only get through like the first two or three chapters. The first 2 or 3 chapters,
once
and then
you paid off your debt, you can start investing. You're like, oh, not there.
yeah. And I was like so excited. I'm like, all right, I can't wait to like go back to these books and read chapter 3 and figure out what to do when I have money.
Totally. We mentioned the finance side of thing, and that is why a lot of people sort of discover and adopt minimalism. Living within your means and downsizing and just living with what you really need. What other role has minimalism played in your life?
I think it's setting priorities, because if everything is important in your life, then nothing is important. You need to be able to have focus. So for me, I think also I would go back to the element of redefining success. For me was pretty fundamental, because to be able to say, well, happiness to me or success to me is being able to, say, run my own business or live independently, not have a job, then I don't have like an ever-ending list of things that will make me happy and content. So oftentimes when you enter the corporate world, you kind of go down this path of continuing to make more money. And I've even seen it with some of my friends where you start out of college making $50,000 a year, and then you're like, wow, if I only made like 70,000, that would be perfect. I'd be happy. And then once you make 70,000, you get used to it. And then you're like, all right, man, if I only made 90,000 or 6 figures, but that never ends. It really doesn't. And you need to identify, all right, where I live right now, how much money do I realistically need to be able to do the things I want to do outside of work, but then also be able to save up for my future retirement, whatever it is. And I guarantee you, it's not as much as you think it is.
Not a ton, yeah. What I love about Josh and Ryan is how they mention, and for people listening, those are the 2 guys behind the Minimalists. What I love is that they say that your minimalism isn't going to look like my minimalism. And it comes down to a definition of like, what's most important? Like, does this add value for you? So it's kind of like we can say that this person is a minimalist and that person is a minimalist, but really there's no one definition. It's like in the film, they mention how Leo's got like 6 or 7 kids. And then you have like some of the other guys who live in the little tiny house. So that's something that I really dig about the whole movement. And while we're on the topic of definitions, you spoke about your definition of success, and you briefly mentioned it's like being able to work for yourself. Is that what you would say now is your view of success?
Yeah, I think it's always changing and it's always evolving because, oh man, like I've had these kind of wild, ambitious, and crazy goals. Like literally, when I was just starting out, to be able to run a sustainable business as a freelancer, as a filmmaker, whether it's filming weddings or bar mitzvahs, whatever it is, that to me felt like success. And then once I got there, I felt as if I needed to continually challenge myself. So I think that's one of those elements, and you can kind of separate them into different buckets where it's like my personal health and my well-being. So if I'm exercising and feeling well, that's an element of whether I feel successful or not. The other one is, like I said, challenging yourself. So if I feel like I'm kind of stuck, and that's what happened when I was starting out, I just was doing weddings and bar mitzvahs, and it was cool. I was making pretty good money, but it just wasn't fulfilling after a while. And for some people, that is a path that like they can go down and they can continually challenge themselves, and they love to shoot weddings. And I say more power to them. But for me, I just wasn't happy doing it long term. I didn't see myself doing it long term. So being challenged is really important. Being financially secure and financially free is really important. And then kind of the relationship aspect. So am I feeling like I'm engaging and building relationships that are meaningful? Those are like the four main buckets. And I will say that oftentimes this is life. Like a lot of times we like to think that, at least when we talk about it and write about it, that life is perfect and it's easy to kind of balance these buckets, but sometimes it goes out of whack. And even when I was making Minimalism, which is a documentary about like building meaningful relationships and meaningful lives, I sacrificed a lot to make that film. So I would, during the final stint when we were rushing towards our deadline, and I directed, edited, it was pretty much a one-man crew. So we went into this, we had Josh and Ryan, who are producers. They run the website, theminimalist.com, which is hugely successful. And they really were instrumental in kind of getting the film off the ground, making sure we got distribution, providing and helping with the vision for the film. But apart from that, I had to put this thing together pretty much by myself, which meant 10 to 12 hour days for like a couple months straight as we rushed towards our deadline. I remember just at like 7 a.m., I'd wake up, I'd work through the day, I'd eat a peanut butter sandwich, and then I'd finish up around 7 or 8 p.m. And I would just repeat that for a very long time. I imagine there's probably a way to do this where you don't sacrifice that much, which is something that I this is my first feature-length documentary. So I think there's always learning lessons you can take, and setting realistic deadlines is certainly one of them. But sometimes you have to make some sacrifices in order to achieve great things. So, there might be times where I'm focusing more on my health than I am on my business, which is fine. And I think it's just kind of continuing to tweak these levers over time and then figuring out what works for you.
Yeah, I don't believe in the notion of work-life balance. I think at different times of your life, different things are going to need attention. So I'm glad you brought that up. And you mentioned the documentary, which I'm really glad about, because that must have been, you speak about being at the gym and seeing a little commercial pop up on the screen. You guys sold out to like massive venues across the world with this documentary. How did it feel to achieve like a major life goal like that?
Well, it's funny because before we started the film, it was maybe 6 months before, I started a bucket list, and on the top of the list was make a feature-length documentary about something I care about. And then 6 months later, Josh calls me, or he sent me an email, and it just said, the subject line was idea. And he's like, hey man, I got an idea to do a feature-length documentary about minimalism. It was something that I had thought about doing, but realistically, I didn't think it was possible. I was like, oh, it would be cool to interview these guys, Josh and Ryan. Little did I know, 6 months later, we partner up to make this film. And we had really no expectations. They had a pretty decent sized audience. So I think we were thinking, all right, we'll put together a little movie and then we'll just release it on Vimeo or iTunes, and we'll just give it to their fans. But as we proceeded along, it was really a 2.5 year process. And it was like, as we went along and as we interviewed more people and built out this film more and more, we got the feeling that it was starting to connect and resonate with people. Although it's hard to say. Even from my perspective, I'm my harshest critic. So I'm like, they're just being nice. Like I couldn't. It's really hard to grasp whether something is actually going to be is going to resonate with people. And apart from people who already know about minimalism. So it's like, if we were just going to make this film for people who were minimalists, people who advocated for simple living, then I feel like we wouldn't be doing our job. We need to really be talking to people who were at my point when I was 18 years old, people who feel stuck, feel trapped, want to make a change in their life, but they can't. And then to show them all these different ways that you can was really the main goal. And then, so we did like a theatrical, we did a film festival run, which was like somewhat successful. It's still hard to grasp. And then we did our theatrical run, which to sell out these theaters, it's actually, you have to be there in person to really experience it, because otherwise it just like, you're just looking at a screen and seeing that like 250 people of 300 bought tickets for the theater. It doesn't really make sense. And it's a little bit surreal, but going there in person, I remember being at the theater in New York City at our world premiere and stepping outside. I was kind of pacing around the venue. I was nervous because I really don't like showing my work in front of large groups of people. To me, that's the most terrifying thing you could do. I still don't like it, even when I'm like, dude, I'll be the guy at the bar across the street. I'll meet up with you guys after the film. I'll do a Q&A afterwards, but I'm not a big fan of like watching my own work in front of other people. But I basically, I took a step outside just for some fresh air. And then I just saw this line wrapped around the corner. And I couldn't believe, I was like, because all I thought I was going to see was just my parents and my family out there. And then just to see all these strangers who I had never met and never known came out to watch my first documentary was an unbelievable experience. And it's something that I'll never forget. And it's something that I'm grateful for today. And so we kind of built upon that. We did, I think it was over 300 theaters across the country. I think we did it in Australia and Canada as well. One of the good things about our partnership with Josh and Ryan is that they were really fundamental in terms of the distribution and pushing the film out there, which meant that I could kind of sit back and relax and take a little bit of a breather after working all these crazy hours. But then they were able to strike a deal. Well, we did like iTunes, Vimeo, and all of that, and that did quite well with their audience. And then the one thing none of us expected was to get on Netflix. And then not only to get on Netflix, but for people to watch it. Because there's a lot of movies and there's a lot of content on Netflix that nobody sees just because it's kind of buried down. So that was really my expectation, is we get on Netflix. That's amazing. That's exciting. But I didn't expect that in the first week it would trend and we would get, they don't really tell you the amount of views, but based on the amount of traffic that has gone to our websites, we can only guess it was millions of people that have seen the film.
Yeah,
right now.
Insane. And you need to be super proud, dude. Like, that's one of my favorite documentaries, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes so everyone can go watch.
Thanks, man.
And I remember seeing one of the last episodes of Making Minimalism, which I'll link up to too. You can see like the people snaking around the corner out of the theater. It must have been so cool. Do you think you can achieve highs like that without first experiencing lows, or at least being prepared to experience those lows?
I think so, and I think it's kind of like the sunny days are only nice in comparison to the rainy days. So I think that you do need to struggle, and you do need to kind of make your own way. So if you think about it, if maybe I was kind of born into a life with more privilege, not that that's a bad thing, but like, say if I had a bunch of money, my parents were rich and I had a bunch of money, like that is not that person's fault. But I think it actually makes it a little bit more difficult, because you need to figure out a way up, a way to create something. In a lot of ways, if you have all the resources in the world, there's a bit more pressure on you. People put more standard, like a higher standard on what you're going to make. So if we had a budget of $1 million to make minimalism and we didn't achieve the success we did, and we didn't get a lot of people to watch it, it would probably be seen as a colossal failure.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we're starting out from nothing, we had no money going into it. We, went into our savings to make this film, and we got the reach that we did. I feel like was the easiest path forward for us, because there weren't high expectations for us.
Yeah, when I totally relate to that. When I was still working in my corporate job 3 years ago, one of the moments that I had was I felt like I'd never had to work hard or struggle for anything. And I'm really grateful that I had, a really good upbringing, and my parents really brought us up with really good values, and we never had to struggle for anything. But it got to a point where it did actually bother me, and I thought I've never had to work hard for something. And I'm not saying that's why I quit my job, but I just felt like I need to see what I'm capable of, and not just cruise through everything.
Yeah, I think the great thing is that you can always start over. And even after finishing minimalism, for me, it was another point, a third life crisis, I guess, where I'm this is it. This was my dream all along, to make this film and then to put it out there. And then you still think, now what? Because you're not ever done. And I think, talking with Jacob Sokol recently, he was talking about learned experiences. And sometimes we know these things, the journey is the fun part, but it takes going through it to really have that cement and become an internal belief. And now I feel like going into these next projects, I can enjoy the process a little bit more. I can enjoy the journey a little bit more. And I think that's kind of one of the key things for me in terms of moving forward, and always being able to start over. So working on a new project now, at this point, nobody has seen it, and it's not even made yet. So you are starting over, and you have to kind of build it from nothing, I think, over and over again. And there's always opportunities to redefine your areas and your areas of focus in life.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, I think it's on your website, where you mentioned you loved it, and when I say it, I mean making minimalism, and you hated it. What made you quit when? What made you carry on going when so many people would have felt like quitting, and just giving up?
I have to attribute that to my team. If I was making this documentary by myself, I don't think it would have ever seen the light of day. If it did, it would probably have been half-assed, and it wouldn't have been that great. But the fact that I had a team there that was both supporting me, encouraging me, and expecting things from me, expecting great work from me, it narrowed my audience. I'm all right, I need to make this film for my producers, and I want them to really enjoy it and to be in and excited about what I'm creating. So, you generally don't send an entire full cut first. You're sending little bits and pieces to them. But there were deadlines along the way where they're like, hey, Matt, how's the recut going? How's edit number 1 going? And that, to me, pushes me and encourages me. I think that was something that I didn't expect going into it, how important it would be to have partners. So I have to say that would be the main thing.
Yeah, and I know, I saw in Making Minimalism, you kind of got to a version and then completely threw it out and started over again.
Oh my God! Yeah, there was serious, I guess not conflict, but serious struggles in terms of making this documentary, and I there was so much doubt that I had gone through, and I continue to go through. And that's something I talk a lot about on my podcast, is just how do you overcome doubt? How do you keep going in the face of when everything seems to be working against you? So we had a cut that our whole team loved, and I had taken a couple weeks away from it and then looked at it again, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. I need to recut the whole thing. I gotta throw it off. So I literally,
the entire documentary,
the entire thing, man, I recut it from scratch. And it was much shorter this time, but it took just as long. It was 60 minutes. And I sent it to Josh and Ryan, and then they got the whole team. Happened to be all together. they were about to screen the old version, the original version of the film at our very first screening
Oh, no way.
at this conference called Fargo. Not a conference called Fargo. It was Misfit Con in Fargo. And they were about to screen it, I think, on that Sunday. And Friday night is when I sent the new film to Josh. They all gathered around on Saturday because I was like, I want to screen this new version. I don't want to screen the old version. And they all watched it. And then they were like, no, like they had like a little Skype intervention with me. They're like, Matt, this is not good. The old version is way better than this version. Like, well, I don't know what you're thinking. And that was a really heavy blow to me because I knew that the original version wasn't there. It wasn't right. And it wasn't compelling in the way that, and it didn't tell the story in the way I wanted to tell it. But I guess I had missed the mark on the version 2 for whatever reason. But so then the next day we screened the original film at Fargo and there was a standing ovation. So in my mind, I'm thinking, like, how am I ever going to change this film? How am I ever going to be able to convince these guys that there still needs to be changes made? So this is a long, like, process over months where I was able to kind of win them over slowly with certain ideas. Like, hey, we should really focus on Josh and Ryan's backstory because I don't think there's enough of a relationship built from people who don't know Josh and Ryan. So if somebody like you are going to the film without knowing them,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how are you going to develop a relationship with them? How are you going to connect with them? So part of their story was that they came from nothing. They were poor. Their homes are pretty broken when they were younger.
Yeah.
And that was in the original film at all. So there were things like that where I slowly got the little wins. And then I just kind of went with it and then radically recut the film again. And luckily that version, it was, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and like thinking about it now, well, two things. It's so weird. I love the film. And if I think, like, how else would this have even been? Like, I just know this version now, and I can't imagine it being any different. But if I do think of the film, the parts that immediately stand out to me the most were their backstories and how, I think it was Josh's mom had a drug problem, and when he's standing in the desert reading the book, like, that was really touching.
Yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, like it's one of those things that I have that same experience when I watch other people's documentaries and films. You kind of, and that's one of the reasons why I made Making Minimalism, which is this series deconstructing how we made the film. Because whenever you watch a final product, you think, well, yeah, of course, that's the way they would cut it. That's the story. That's the way that it goes. But there are millions and millions of choices and tiny details that you focus on that really shape what a film is or what a book is. And that's one of those things that I think it's really interesting to see the behind the scenes of what it takes, because it could really go in any direction.
Yeah, well, big ups for sticking up for what you believed in there, man.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, that really is what it came down to, is that I believed so passionately about this new version of the film and about the direction that the film was headed, that I couldn't envision it happening any other way. And there were compromises along the way where both of us kind of gave in a little bit, but for the most part, I was like, I have to figure out a way. Like, whether it's spending 8 hours working on, so I basically detailed the narrative arc in like a 5 or 6 page document, 2 5 or 6 page documents of each film. So it was like the old film and then the new film that I cut. And these are the points of the arc and the story. And this is how we see Josh and Ryan's story progressing over time. This is how we see unwrapping minimalism and the certain ideas within it. And then just comparing the two of them and still running into walls and saying, all right, like, what can I do now? Can I pull apart this film and show them small portions of it to kind of convince them otherwise? And it becomes difficult at that point, because you're not seeing it with fresh eyes anymore. You're seeing what you've seen 15, 20, 30 times. You've seen this film a lot at this point. So to be able to convince people into your way of thinking is very difficult.
Yeah, I know we're speaking about minimalism and documentaries and stuff, but there's such a deeper underlying message here. Like, if you want something badly enough and you believe strongly in it, like, you just got to do the work and stick with it and eventually people will kind of see what you had in mind and what you're all about.
Totally.
What I really loved is how you took the sort of behind the scenes from making the documentary and created a mini series literally called Making Minimalism, and people can find that on your YouTube channel. And now you're making another sort of mini film called Unstuck, I think.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could share, it's based on the lessons you learned from the people you interviewed in the documentary. I wonder if you could share some of the sort of key lessons there. I know you're passionate about helping creatives get unstuck, but it's not just creatives that struggle with this issue. So what were some of the big things that you learned for people who do feel stuck in their lives at the moment?
I'll say the one big thing, and so basically Unstuck is pulling together these bits and pieces of minimalism and interviews that we didn't use to tell the story of these people who were at one point in their lives stuck, and to a point where they no longer felt stuck. So we interviewed people like Leo Babauta of Zen Habits and Courtney Carver from Be More with Less. And these were people that were really inspiring to me, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, who had really inspired me. And you look at their lives and you're like, wow, like they really got it all figured out. But then to learn about their backstory, to learn that at one point they didn't have it all figured out. Leo, for instance, was a smoker. He was overweight. He was incredibly unhealthy. So it's like, how do you change your habits? How do you change your life? And the one thing that I'll give you is it always started with one thing. It was the same across the board, is that people started to ask questions about what they wanted out of life, about what their life was going to look like. Because if they didn't take that first step, if they didn't first identify, well, what do I want my life to look like? You're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then at that point, some of these people, they put together a plan and an idea, and they put it in paper, and they started to write down what their life was going to look like. And I think that's important too, because if you just keep these ideas in your head, if you don't talk about them or put them down into paper, then they're never going to become a reality. Like that's just the way our brains work. Our brains aren't that developed in the sense of like in the morning we may want one thing, at night we like think about it. If before you go to bed, you're like, I want to wake up early in the morning, and then you don't set an alarm, or maybe you set an alarm 8 a.m. and then it goes off and you just snooze it and you keep snoozing it. Like the way our mind works, it's very different from moment to moment. So in order to control that, put it down on paper, make it realistic, and then keep moving forward. But that was the starting point. I think it always starts with awareness and asking questions. And that's one of the main things that we wanted to get out of minimalism, was if we could at the very least get people to start asking some difficult questions about their lives and what they want, then I think we'll have succeeded.
Yeah, and Jacob, another thing that Jacob's taught me is something he says is the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to throw the most cliched interviewer question at you right now, and that is, what's next? Like, you've had the really pretty objective success of minimalism, a major goal of yours. Like, where do you go from here?
So I'm working on a new top secret project right now with Josh and Ryan. We're literally just getting started out with it, and we're following a pretty similar approach that we had with minimalism. Like, let's just go out, start filming. We know we want to dig into this topic of minimalism and simple living deeper. I think creating that film, it answered a lot of questions, but it certainly sparked a lot of questions as well. So Josh and Ryan will go out and have these events where they get really amazing questions from their audience. And I think these are some of the questions that we want to dig a little bit deeper into to figure out and understand how simple living and minimalism can help change different aspects of your life. What's the global movement of minimalism look like? I recently moderated an event with a Japanese author, Fumio Sasaki, and just really fascinating to see how that movement the new minimalism movement is growing in Japan, just as it is growing here. So that's one focus. I just started to create some original content as well, like making minimalism. My YouTube channel is
Yeah, it's
one of
awesome.
my, thanks, man. Like I'm just really getting started out with this thing. Like I had never really put my voice out there or started to create original content in that way where it's kind of my voice and my message. So minimalism kind of is, but it really is. I'm behind the scenes, and that like you don't see or hear me throughout it. So I'm like, all right, in what ways can I teach people who are just getting started out, people who are struggling or maybe at a turning point in their careers where they're similar to what you're doing? It's like, how can we help people kind of bridge the gap between not knowing where they're going to where they want to be? Mm. And that's what I'm doing with my YouTube channel. I've got a podcast called The Ground Up Show, which is very similar, kind of breaking down and deconstructing how people have achieved the kind of dreams and goals that they had set out to do. And yeah, so that's it. So those are the two to three main avenues right now that I'm tackling.
No more treadmill commercials.
No, you know what, man? I will say, like, I don't do treadmill commercials, but I do a little bit of client work here and there. I do find that, man, like it becomes overwhelming if you try to do too much at once. Mm-hmm. So I'm at a transition point where I'm probably gonna significantly slow down on client work. That way I can work on these other projects that to me are a little bit more meaningful.
Yeah, Matt, we're coming up on time here. Is there anything else you think would be valuable for people listening that we haven't touched on yet?
Oh man, that's a good question. I would say, oh man, I don't know. That's a tough one. You got anything for me?
Well, something that I was thinking of asking is, and this probably relates more to, people taking the creative path, but I think just the nature of pursuing a creative path, you're going to come up with against a lot of naysayers. And I'm sure you did too. Like, what's your advice for people who are in a position where they have an idea of what they want to do and it's maybe not the conventional route, and they're facing all these people who are saying like, you can't make money from that, or just get a real job or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly got that. I got that from the very beginning. I remember.
Stop making movies, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. Like, honestly, back in high school, I heard this a lot, and maybe at the time, like that was a different world. Everything was analog. I was recording to DV tapes back in high school, and that path wasn't as realistic, and there wasn't really the DIY, do-it-yourself DSLR filmmaker. That just didn't really exist at the time, and now it's just everybody with a camera is a filmmaker. And yeah, people would just tell me that, like, yeah, I don't think you're gonna like be able to make it in this path. If you do, there's not going to be a lot of money in it. The encouragement that I would get, and so let's just say like filmmaking, for instance, as an example, there's always at least two routes that you can go down with a specific path. It's do it yourself or become like an apprentice and work your way up at either a company or a small, filmmaking studio, or even like a big commercial studio. For me, what was most valuable was just doing it myself and doing it outside of the classroom. So if you're going to rely on a syllabus to tell you what to do and how to get better at a particular craft, then you're doing it wrong. I think the reason why I was able to progress so quickly was because even in high school, I was like editing and making videos outside of school. And then when I got to college, I was doing it outside of school, and I was able to find a couple clients who paid me money to make videos, which was an amazing experience and something I never thought I'd be able to get to do. But then I just kept building upon that slowly. And along the way, there are certainly going to be people who tell you that you can't do it. But I think you have to just put your head down and keep going and focus on the little wins. Like, there will be failures along the way, but the little wins are what are going to keep you and push you forward and make you feel as if you're actually headed in a direction that's sustainable.
Totally. Matt, I do have some rapid fire questions at the end here. So the first thing that comes to mind, just in a sentence or two, is perfect. The first one is, what do you wish you'd been told in your 20s?
That it's possible, that I can make it if I redefine what making it is.
What is the greatest opportunity for quarter lifers today?
Say that again?
The greatest opportunity for quarter lifers today.
The greatest opportunity is focusing on your superpower, your skill. What have you been working on for the past 5 to 10 years that you are uniquely capable of sharing with the world?
I've got one more question before I get to that. Where's the best place for people to get hold of you? I know we've mentioned some of the projects you're working on and your YouTube channel, but if people want to get in touch, where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, I think my main hub is mattdiavella.com. So that's MattDavella. .com. I get into those patterns of like saying my email address over the phone. Yeah, it's mattdiavella.com.
Perfect. And I'll link up all the good stuff we've mentioned in the interview at the show notes. Matt, before I get to the final question, I just want to take a second to acknowledge you for coming on today. But even more than that, for facing that net worth and not even worthless, but even less than that. And, just deciding to do something about it and turning it around in a space of 4 years, I think is amazing. And now sharing your gift with the world via both your YouTube channel and the beautiful creation that is minimalism. I really, if people haven't watched it, I urge them to go watch. But I just wanted to acknowledge you for turning it around and redefining what success means to you and then achieving that. Cool. The final question I have is, what one thing can listeners do this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback?
Read the book, The Flinch. I could probably recommend 100 different books to read. But starting out, like just reading self-development and self-improvement books were hugely inspiring and motivating for me. And one of those books is The Flinch by Julian Smith. It's a really short book. You probably will read it in a night. It might be 2 nights where you get through it. It is incredibly inspiring, and it challenges your assumptions. And I think it gets you to stop making excuses and to start creating.
I'm going to go check that out. Matt D'Avella, thank you so much for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
All right, Brian. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up this week's episode of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And a big thanks to Matt D'Avella for coming out and hanging out with us this week. I really enjoyed this show, and I hope you got a lot out of it too. If you did, I'd love it if you shared around with your friends on social media and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier and tag Matt at Matt D'Avella and let us know your biggest takeaway. For me, it was the fact that Matt faced this seemingly insurmountable amount of debt, and he overcame it by getting aware of where he was and what it was he wanted to achieve, and then asking better questions. And I really encourage you to do the same, no matter what it is that you're facing right now. Remember, this show was brought to you by Nomad Accelerator, where you'll fly to an in-person event and learn from some of the most successful online entrepreneurs and digital nomads in the world to how you can create a location-independent business and lifestyle. To find out more, go to bootcamp.nomadaccelerator.com and use the coupon code QLC at checkout to get $250 off. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/063. Thanks once again for joining me this week, and until next time, keep creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.